On a winter morning in Wyoming, when the wind cuts sharp across the sagebrush and the sky stretches endless and pale, a young woman vanished from a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business. The date was February 14, 2001, Valentine's Day. The location was a modest home on the outskirts of Lander, a town of 5,000 souls pressed against the foothills of the Wind River Range. The victim was 23-year-old Jennifer Walsh, a waitress at the local diner, a mother to a 4-year-old daughter named Emma, and a wife to Michael Walsh, a mechanic at the Chevron station on Main Street. By nightfall, Jennifer was gone. By the next morning, the questions had already begun to multiply like cracks in ice. And for 23 years, those questions would hang in the air above that town, unanswered, until a single phone call in the autumn of 2024 would shatter the silence and reveal what had been hidden in plain sight all along. How does someone disappear from their own home in broad daylight? And how does the person who knows exactly what happened manage to live with that knowledge for more than 2 decades? Lander, Wyoming sits in the geographical heart of the state, cradled between mountain ranges that seem to touch the clouds. In 2001, it was a town built on ranching, tourism, and the quiet desperation of people trying to make ends meet in a place where winter arrives early and stays late. The Walsh family lived in a single-story ranch house with faded yellow siding on Cottonwood Road, a gravel lane that dead-ended at an irrigation ditch. The house had 3 small bedrooms, a kitchen with linoleum floors that curled at the edges, and a living room dominated by a television that flickered with static when the wind blew hard. Jennifer had grown up in Riverton, 25 miles south, and had met Michael at a high school football game when she was 17. They married young, the way people did in that part of the country, and Emma arrived 10 months later. Jennifer worked the morning shift at Betty's Diner, arriving at 5:30 to pour coffee for ranchers and highway workers. She had light brown hair that she wore pulled back in a ponytail, hazel eyes that crinkled when she smiled, and a habit of humming while she worked. Those who knew her said she was kind but quiet, the type who listened more than she spoke. Michael worked longer hours at the gas station, often coming home after dark with grease under his fingernails and the smell of motor oil on his clothes. He was 26, tall and lean, with dark hair and a way of looking past people when they talked to him. February 14th dawned cold and clear. The thermometer outside the Walsh kitchen window read 12 degrees. Jennifer had the day off, a rare weekday at home, and she planned to bake heart-shaped cookies with Emma. She had bought red frosting and sprinkles at the grocery store the day before. The morning began the way most mornings did in that house. Jennifer woke at 6, made coffee in the percolator that hissed and sputtered on the stove, and let Emma sleep in. Michael had already left for work. His shift started at 7, and he liked to arrive early to open the garage bay doors and start the space heater that took an hour to warm the concrete floor. At 8:15, Jennifer called her mother in Riverton. They talked for 11 minutes about nothing important: the weather, Emma's upcoming birthday, a recipe for pot roast. Her mother would later remember that Jennifer sounded tired but normal. At 9 o'clock, Emma woke up and padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, asking for pancakes. Jennifer made them, 3 small circles on the griddle, and poured syrup that ran to the edges of the plate. They ate together at the kitchen table while snow began to fall outside, light flakes that drifted down like ash. At 10:30, a neighbor named Dorothy Fletcher drove past the Walsh house on her way to town. She would later tell investigators that she saw Jennifer's car, a blue Honda Civic, parked in the driveway. She saw no other vehicles. She noticed nothing unusual. By noon, the snow had stopped. The house was quiet. Emma was watching cartoons in the living room, curled under a blanket on the couch. Jennifer was in the kitchen, washing dishes in the sink. The water ran warm over her hands. The radio on the counter played country music, Garth Brooks singing about thunder rolling and lightning striking. This was the last moment anyone could definitively place Jennifer Walsh alive in her home, doing something ordinary, something that required no explanation. What happened in the hours that followed would become the subject of endless speculation, of theories whispered over coffee at Betty's diner and debated in the parking lot of the grocery store. The timeline, when investigators finally pieced it together, contained gaps that could not be explained. Michael Walsh called the house at 12:15 from the gas station. The phone rang 7 times. No one answered. He called again at 12:40. Again, no answer. He would later say he wasn't worried, that Jennifer sometimes took Emma for walks or went to visit her mother without telling him. At 2 o'clock, Michael left work. He told his supervisor he wasn't feeling well, that he needed to go home. The drive from the gas station to Cottonwood Road took 8 minutes. He arrived home at 2:10. Later, much later, investigators would note this with interest. Why would a man who wasn't worried about his wife not answering the phone suddenly leave work in the middle of his shift? When Michael entered the house, Emma was still on the couch, still watching television. She was 4 years old, small for her age, with blonde hair and her mother's eyes. Michael asked her where Jennifer was. Emma said she didn't know. She said her mother had gone outside. She said it had been a long time. Michael searched the house. He called Jennifer's name. He looked in every room, in the closets, in the bathroom. He went outside and walked the perimeter of the property, his boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. He checked the shed where they kept gardening tools and old paint cans. He called Jennifer's cell phone. It rang from inside the house, on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger. At 2:45, Michael called 911. The recording of that call still exists in the Fremont County archives. Michael's voice sounds strained but controlled. He says his wife is missing. He says she wouldn't just leave their daughter alone. He says he doesn't understand what's happening. The dispatcher asks how long Jennifer has been gone. Michael says he doesn't know, maybe since noon, maybe longer. The dispatcher asks if they had an argument. Michael says no. The dispatcher asks if Jennifer had any problems, any reason to leave. Michael says no, nothing like that, she was fine, everything was fine. Deputies from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office arrived at 2:58. There were 2 of them initially, Deputy Carson Miller and Deputy Andrea Hayes. They found Michael standing in the driveway, his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. They found Emma inside, still on the couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She seemed confused but not distressed. When Deputy Hayes asked her about her mother, Emma said Mommy went outside and didn't come back. When asked if Mommy said where she was going, Emma shook her head. The deputies conducted a preliminary search of the property. They noted that Jennifer's car was in the driveway, her keys on the kitchen counter beside her phone. Her purse was on the table by the front door, containing her wallet with $43 and her driver's license. Her winter coat hung on a hook in the hallway. The temperature outside had not risen above 20 degrees all day. The back door was unlocked. In the backyard, there were footprints in the snow, but the snow had been falling on and off, and the prints were indistinct, impossible to identify or follow. By 4 o'clock, more deputies had arrived. By 5 o'clock, volunteers from the community had begun to gather. They brought flashlights and thermoses of coffee. They organized into teams and spread out across the fields and ditches surrounding the Walsh property. They called Jennifer's name into the gathering darkness. They searched until midnight, their voices growing hoarse, their fingers numb inside their gloves. They found nothing. No sign of Jennifer, no indication of where she had gone or what had happened to her. The swing set in the backyard hung motionless. A child's toy truck lay on its side in the snow near the back steps. The house lights glowed yellow against the black sky, and somewhere in that darkness, a young mother had ceased to exist, had been erased from the world as if she had never been there at all. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation expanded at dawn on February 15th. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office called in additional resources, search and rescue teams, tracking specialists, volunteers from neighboring communities. By mid-morning, more than 60 people were combing the area within a 5-mile radius of the Walsh home. They walked in lines through the sagebrush, their eyes scanning the ground for any trace of clothing, blood, or disturbance. Helicopters flew overhead, their rotors thumping in the thin air. Dogs pulled at their leashes, noses to the earth, searching for a scent they could not find. The media arrived by noon. Local television crews from Casper and Cheyenne set up cameras on Cottonwood Road. Reporters interviewed neighbors who said Jennifer was a wonderful mother, a kind person, someone who would never abandon her child. They interviewed Michael, who stood in his driveway with red eyes and a clenched jaw, who said he just wanted his wife to come home. The footage shows a man who appears exhausted and frightened, his hands shaking slightly as he speaks. Clears throat. But even then, in those first frantic days, there were whispers. Those who knew him said Michael seemed almost too composed, too controlled. He answered questions carefully with long pauses. When asked to describe the morning, he provided details that sounded rehearsed. He said Jennifer had been making cookies with Emma. He said everything was normal. He said he had no idea what could have happened. But when pressed for specifics, for the small moments that make up a morning, he became vague. What had Jennifer been wearing? He wasn't sure. Blue jeans, maybe, a sweater. What time had Emma woken up? He didn't know. He had already left for work. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves. They noted inconsistencies in Michael's timeline. He said he had called the house twice before leaving work, but phone records showed 3 calls. He said he arrived home at 2:10, but a neighbor reported seeing his truck pass by on Cottonwood Road at 1:50. 20 minutes unaccounted for. When investigators asked about this discrepancy, Michael said he must have been mistaken about the time. He said he was upset, confused, not thinking clearly. The physical evidence, such as it was, told a story with missing pages. There was no blood in the house, no signs of struggle, no broken furniture or overturned lamps. The back door had been unlocked, but Michael said they often left it that way during the day. In the backyard, investigators found those indistinct footprints, adult-sized, leading from the back steps toward the irrigation ditch. But the snow had covered and uncovered the ground multiple times, and the prints were too degraded to yield useful impressions. Near the ditch, they found a single earring, a small silver hoop. Jennifer's mother confirmed it looked like ones her daughter owned, but she couldn't be certain. The irrigation ditch ran for miles, eventually feeding into the Popo-Ag River. Search teams waded through the icy water, probing the mud with poles. Divers were called in to check deeper pools downstream. They found nothing. No clothing, no body, nothing to suggest Jennifer had ever been there. On February 20th, 5 days after Jennifer vanished, investigators conducted a formal interview with Michael Walsh at the sheriff's office. The interview lasted 4 hours. A recording was made, though it was never released to the public. According to the official report, Michael maintained his account of the day. He insisted he had no knowledge of what happened to his wife. He said their marriage was solid. He said they had no serious arguments, no financial problems, no affairs. When asked if he had ever been violent toward Jennifer, he said no, never. When asked if Jennifer had ever expressed fear of him, he said no, absolutely not. But the investigators were not convinced. They had spoken to Jennifer's coworkers at the diner, who painted a different picture. One waitress, whose name was redacted in the reports but who spoke on condition of anonymity, said Jennifer had seemed withdrawn in recent months. She said Jennifer once came to work with a bruise on her arm, and when asked about it, said she had bumped into a door. Another coworker said Jennifer had asked, hypothetically, what someone should do if they wanted to leave a relationship, but were afraid of what might happen. Jennifer's mother provided even more troubling details. She told investigators that Jennifer had called her 2 weeks before she disappeared, crying. Jennifer said she and Michael had argued about money. She said Michael had a temper, that he sometimes punched walls when he was angry. She said she was thinking about taking Emma and staying with her mother for a while. But then, a few days later, Jennifer called back and said everything was fine. She said she had overreacted. She said she loved Michael, and they were going to work things out. Investigators requested permission to search the Walsh home more thoroughly. Michael agreed, perhaps because refusing would have looked suspicious. On February 23rd, a team of forensic specialists spent 12 hours going through every inch of the house. They used luminol in the bedroom and bathroom, checking for traces of blood that might have been cleaned up. They found nothing. They examined the carpets for fibers or stains. They found nothing. They checked the washing machine for evidence that bloodied clothing might have been laundered. They found nothing. The truck Michael drove, a white Ford F-150, was also examined. Investigators noted that it had been recently cleaned, inside and out. Michael said he had washed it the weekend before Jennifer disappeared, that he always kept his vehicle clean. The truck bed was empty except for a coil of rope and a toolbox. The odometer showed Michael had driven approximately 56 miles on Valentine's Day. The gas station where he worked was 8 miles from his home. Round trip, that would be 16 miles. Where had the other 40 miles taken him? When confronted with this, Michael said he had driven around after leaving work, that he had been upset and needed to clear his head before going home. He said he drove out toward South Pass, then turned around. Investigators drove the route he described. It added up, more or less. There was no proof he had gone anywhere else. Clears throat. By March, the investigation had reached an impasse. There was suspicion but no evidence. There were questions but no answers. The community remained divided. Some believed Michael was responsible, that he had done something terrible to his wife and hidden it well. Others believed Jennifer had run away, perhaps to escape a troubled marriage, perhaps to start a new life somewhere else. Still others clung to hope that she had been abducted, that she was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. The case was featured on regional news programs. Tips came in from across the state, from people who claimed to have seen a woman matching Jennifer's description at a gas station in Rawlins, at a motel in Rock Springs, at a bus station in Cheyenne. Every lead was followed. Every tip was investigated. All of them led nowhere. By summer, the searches had stopped. The volunteers had returned to their lives. The reporters had moved on to other stories. Jennifer Walsh became another name on a list, another unsolved case in a county that had seen more than its share of tragedies. The file remained open, but the activity slowed to a trickle. Deputies occasionally received calls about the case, usually from Jennifer's mother, asking if there were any updates. There never were. Michael continued to work at the gas station. He continued to live in the house on Cottonwood Road with Emma. He gave no more interviews. When people saw him around town, they noticed he kept to himself, that he no longer made eye contact, that he seemed to carry a heaviness that had not been there before. Those who had known Jennifer avoided him. Those who believed in his innocence felt awkward and uncertain, unsure of what to say. And so the case went cold. The wind continued to blow across the sagebrush. The seasons turned. And in that house with the faded yellow siding, a little girl grew up without her mother, and a man lived with whatever knowledge he possessed, locked behind eyes that revealed nothing. Part 3. The Silence. 18 months after Jennifer disappeared, Michael Walsh moved. He packed up the house on Cottonwood Road in the middle of the night, loading boxes into his truck while Emma slept. By morning, they were gone. A neighbor noticed the for sale sign in the yard, the empty driveway. Word spread quickly through Lander. Some said he was running from something. Others said he was trying to give Emma a fresh start. No one knew where he had gone. It would later emerge that Michael had relocated to Gillette, a town in northeastern Wyoming, more than 200 miles from Lander. He found work at another gas station. He rented a small apartment in a complex near the railroad tracks. He enrolled Emma in kindergarten under his last name only, no mention of her mother on the paperwork. He told people when they asked that his wife had passed away. He did not elaborate. Most people, sensing his discomfort, did not press further. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the dissonance between what you're told and what you sense, you know the weight of that uncertainty. It accumulates slowly, like sediment at the bottom of a river. Emma grew older in that apartment in Gillette, and as she grew, she began to remember things that didn't align with the story her father told. She remembered her mother, not as someone who had passed away peacefully, but as someone who had simply disappeared. She remembered the day the police came. She remembered sitting on the couch with a stuffed rabbit while adults asked her questions she didn't understand. She also began to have nightmares. Michael would wake in the night to hear her crying, calling for her mother. He would go to her room and sit on the edge of her bed, and he would tell her everything was okay, that she was safe. But his hands shook when he touched her hair. His voice sounded hollow. Emma noticed these things. Children notice everything. In school, Emma drew pictures. Her teachers kept some of them, concerned by their content. In one drawing made when she was 7, she depicted a house with yellow siding and a woman lying on the ground outside. When her teacher asked about it, Emma said it was nothing, just a drawing. But the teacher made a note in her file. Michael's behavior also began to change in ways that people around him noticed. He drank more, buying bottles of whiskey that he kept in the kitchen cabinet and emptied slowly over the course of weeks. He became more withdrawn, speaking only when necessary, answering questions with single words. At work, his supervisor noted that he was reliable but distant, the kind of employee who did his job competently but formed no relationships, attended no social gatherings, shared nothing about his personal life. There were moments when the weight seemed almost too much. A coworker once found Michael sitting in his truck in the parking lot after his shift had ended, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. When asked if he was all right, Michael said he was fine, just tired. But his eyes were red and his voice cracked when he spoke. In 2008, when Emma was 11, she asked her father directly about her mother for the first time. They were eating dinner at the small kitchen table in their apartment, spaghetti from a jar, garlic bread from the freezer. Emma set down her fork and said, "What really happened to Mom?" Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know." Emma said, "That's not true." Michael said, "Eat your dinner." But Emma didn't eat. She stared at him, this man who was her father, this man who was a stranger, and she said, "I remember things." Michael stood up. He took his plate to the sink. He said, his back to her, "You were very young. Sometimes children remember things that didn't happen." Emma said, "I remember you were there." Michael didn't respond. He washed his plate, the water running loud in the silence. Emma watched him, and something shifted in that moment, some understanding that passed between them unspoken. She did not ask again, but the question remained, suspended in the air like dust in sunlight. By the time Emma was a teenager, the distance between them had grown vast. They lived in the same small apartment but occupied separate worlds. Emma spent most of her time in her room or at friends' houses. She avoided being alone with Michael. When he tried to talk to her, she gave monosyllabic responses. When he asked about school, she said it was fine. When he asked about her friends, she said they were fine. Everything was fine except that nothing was. Michael seemed to age rapidly in those years. He developed a persistent cough. He lost weight. His hair, which had been dark, turned gray at the temples. His hands, which had been steady, began to tremble. Those who saw him at work or at the grocery store noticed he looked older than his years, worn down by something invisible but inexorable. In 2015, when Emma was 18, she left. She graduated high school on a Saturday in May, and by Sunday she was gone. She had saved money from a part-time job at a fast food restaurant. She had applied to colleges in other states without telling Michael. She had been accepted to a small state university in Montana. She packed a single suitcase, left a note on the kitchen table that said only "I need to go," and took a Greyhound bus north. Michael came home from work to find the apartment empty in a way it had never been before. He stood in the doorway of Emma's room and looked at the bare walls, the stripped bed, the absence of all the small things that had made it hers. He sat down on the floor and stayed there for a long time, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. For those who have ever felt the unbearable solitude of guilt, the way it eats at you from the inside until you are hollow, you can imagine what those years were like for Michael Walsh. He continued to work. He continued to pay rent. He continued to exist. But he was a ghost, haunting his own life, waiting for something that felt inevitable but had not yet arrived. That something would come, finally, in the autumn of 2024, 23 years after Jennifer disappeared. It would come in the form of a phone call, a statement given to authorities, and a revelation that would crack open the silence that had calcified around that cold case in Lander, Wyoming. Part 4. The Revelation. On September 12, 2024, Emma Walsh, now Emma Carter, having taken her husband's name, walked into the Missoula Police Department in Montana. She was 32 years old, a nurse at the local hospital, the mother of twin daughters. She asked to speak to someone about a case in Wyoming. She said it was about her mother. She said it was about what happened in 2001. The officer who took her statement was Detective Laura Simmons, a 20-year veteran who had worked countless cases but would later say this one affected her more than most. Emma sat across from Detective Simmons in a small interview room with beige walls and fluorescent lights. She held a cup of coffee in both hands. Her voice was quiet but steady. Emma said, "I need to tell someone what I remember. I should have done this years ago." Detective Simmons listened. She recorded the conversation. What Emma described would form the basis for reopening the investigation into Jennifer Walsh's disappearance. Emma said she remembered the day her mother vanished more clearly than she had ever told anyone. She said that for years, she had convinced herself her memories were unreliable, that she had been too young to know what she had seen. But she said the memories had never faded. If anything, they had grown sharper. She said she remembered being in the living room, watching cartoons. She said she heard her parents arguing in the kitchen. She couldn't make out all the words, but she remembered her mother saying she was done, that she couldn't do this anymore. She remembered her father's voice getting louder. She remembered something breaking, like glass shattering. Emma said she got up from the couch and went to the doorway of the kitchen. She said she saw her mother on the floor. She said her father was standing over her. She said her mother wasn't moving. Detective Simmons asked Emma what happened next. Emma said her father saw her standing there. She said he came over to her and picked her up and carried her back to the living room. She said he told her to stay there and watch TV. She said he told her mommy was sleeping and not to bother her. She said he seemed very calm. His hands were steady. His voice was gentle. Emma said she sat back down on the couch. She said she heard sounds from the kitchen, movement, something being dragged. She said she was scared but didn't understand why. She said later, much later, she heard the back door open and close. She said she stayed on the couch because her father had told her to. She said when her father came back inside, he sat down next to her. She said he asked if she was hungry. She said she wasn't. She said he turned up the volume on the television. She said they sat there together for a long time, maybe hours, she wasn't sure. When Detective Simmons asked why Emma had never told anyone this before, Emma said she had been afraid. She said when the police came that first day, her father had held her in his lap while they asked questions. She said his hand had been on her shoulder, squeezing gently but firmly. She said she understood, even at 4 years old, that she was supposed to say Mommy had gone outside. She said her father had told her that's what happened. She said she believed him, or she convinced herself she believed him. Emma said over the years, as she grew older and began to understand more, she felt trapped by her own silence. She said she thought if she spoke up, she would destroy what was left of her family. She said she thought no one would believe her anyway, that her memories from when she was 4 wouldn't matter. But Emma said that now, as a mother herself, she couldn't stay silent anymore. She said she owed it to her mother. She said she owed it to her own children. She said she needed to tell the truth, whatever the consequences. Detective Simmons contacted the Fremont County Sheriff's Office that same day. The case file was retrieved from storage. Investigators who had worked the original case were brought in, along with new detectives. A meeting was held to assess the credibility of Emma's statement and determine whether there was sufficient cause to reopen the investigation. The consensus was yes. Emma's account, while coming from a child's memory, was specific and detailed. It aligned with some of the suspicions investigators had harbored from the beginning. And there was another factor. Advances in technology meant that evidence could now be examined in ways that had not been possible in 2001. On October 3, 2024, a team of investigators traveled to Gillette. They located Michael Walsh, who was still living in the same apartment he had rented more than 20 years earlier. He was now 55 years old, graying and thin, his face etched with lines that spoke of a difficult life. When investigators knocked on his door at 6 in the morning, Michael answered in his pajamas, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at the badges they held up and said, "I've been waiting for this." He was arrested without incident. He was read his rights. He was handcuffed and led out of the apartment while neighbors watched from their doorways. He said nothing as he was placed in the back of a police cruiser. His expression was blank, resigned, as if some burden had finally been lifted. Michael Walsh was transported back to Lander and held in the Fremont County Detention Center. He was charged with second-degree felony homicide in connection with Jennifer Walsh's death. The charging documents outlined a theory of the case based on Emma's statement and circumstantial evidence from the original investigation. Prosecutors alleged that Michael had caused Jennifer's death during a domestic dispute, that he had disposed of her body in a remote location, and that he had maintained a cover-up for more than 2 decades. On October 7th, Michael Walsh's attorney, a public defender named Robert Keene, requested a meeting with prosecutors. During that meeting, Michael Walsh, after 23 years of silence, confessed. According to the confession, which was recorded and later entered into evidence, Michael said he and Jennifer had argued on the morning of February 14, 2001. He said the argument was about money and his drinking. He said Jennifer told him she was leaving, that she was taking Emma and going to stay with her mother. He said something in him snapped. He said he pushed her. He said she fell and hit her head on the edge of the kitchen counter. He said it happened so fast he didn't have time to think. Michael said he checked on her and realized she wasn't breathing, He said he panicked. He said he knew how it would look. He said he made a decision in that moment that would define the rest of his life. He said he wrapped Jennifer's body in a tarp from the garage. He said he carried her out to his truck while Emma was in the living room. He said he drove out to a remote area near Red Canyon, a place he knew from hunting trips, a place where the ground was rocky and hard. He said he buried her there, covering the site with stones and brush. He said the whole thing took less than 2 hours. He said he came home and told Emma that her mother had gone outside and would be back soon. When asked why he had never admitted this before, why he had let his daughter grow up without her mother and without answers, Michael said he didn't have a good reason. He said he was a coward. He said he hoped, somehow, that he could protect Emma by keeping the truth hidden. He said he was wrong. On October 10th, investigators, accompanied by Michael Walsh, traveled to the location he described near Red Canyon. The area was desolate, covered in sagebrush and punctuated by outcroppings of red rock. Michael led them to a spot approximately 30 yards from a fire access road. He pointed to a pile of stones that looked no different from dozens of others in the area. Excavation began immediately. By late afternoon, the team had uncovered human remains at a depth of approximately 4 feet. The remains were badly decomposed, reduced mostly to bone, but they were intact enough for identification. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. They had found Jennifer Walsh. The discovery sent shockwaves through Lander. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page with a photograph of Jennifer from 2001, smiling, young, alive. The headline read, "Cold Case Solved. Remains Found After 23 Years." Television crews returned to Cottonwood Road, filming the empty lot where the Walsh house had once stood, now overgrown with weeds. Public reaction was divided. Some expressed relief that Jennifer's family finally had answers, that her remains could be laid to rest properly. Others expressed anger at Michael Walsh, at the years of lies, at the suffering he had caused. Still others expressed sympathy, not for Michael, but for the impossible situation his actions had created for Emma, a child forced to carry the weight of her father's crime. Emma released a statement through her attorney. It read, in part, "My mother was a kind and loving person who deserved so much more than what happened to her. I hope that by speaking up, I have given her some measure of justice. I hope other survivors of family violence will find the courage to come forward, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible." Michael Walsh's case proceeded to court. On December 14, 2024, he appeared before a judge for sentencing. He had pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide and abuse of a corpse. The courtroom was packed. Jennifer's mother sat in the front row, her face drawn and tired. Emma was not present. The judge sentenced Michael Walsh to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25. In her remarks, the judge said that while Michael's confession had spared the court a lengthy trial, it did not absolve him of the decades of deception that had compounded the harm of his actions. She said he had not only taken Jennifer's life, but had also stolen Emma's childhood and denied Jennifer's family the ability to mourn. Michael, given the opportunity to speak, said only, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't matter, but I am." He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He will likely spend the remainder of his life in prison. He is currently incarcerated at the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins, a place not far from where Jennifer once lived, where she once dreamed of a future that would never come. Closing. Jennifer Walsh was laid to rest in a cemetery in Riverton on a cold day in January, 24 years after she disappeared. Her grave is marked with a simple headstone that bears her name, her dates, and the words, "Beloved mother and daughter." Those who knew her say she would have wanted something simple, that she was never one for grand gestures. The case of Jennifer Walsh is a reminder that silence has weight, that the truth, no matter how long it takes to surface, does not disappear. It is a reminder that justice, though delayed, still matters. It is a reminder that even in the smallest towns, in the quietest homes, there are stories of loss and survival, of courage and consequence. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.